UK got the first shot in what soon became a global vaccination campaign. Scientists at the Imperial College of London say over the next 12 months, more than 4 billion people lined up for vaccines. And even though there were troubles in distributing vaccines, deaths were prevented. Nearly 2 million in the U.S., 4 million in India, 1 million in Brazil, and many more. But the study published in the journal Lancet Infectious Diseases says more could have been saved if vaccine goals set by the World Health Organization had been met. Jill Nato, Fox News.
Friday marks 1 year since a large portion of a Florida high-rise condominium building collapsed in the middle of the night, killing 98 people, most of whom were trapped in their beds. Family members gathering overnight for private ceremonies, including a torch lighting. The Biden administration has granted some student debt cancellation to settle a lawsuit over alleged fraud claims. The agreement gives $6 billion in federal student loan cancellation to 200,000 borrowers, attending mostly mostly for-profit institutions, including the now closed ITT Technical Institute. Amazon unveiling something new you can train its line of smart speakers to do.
A new Alexa capability is getting mixed reviews after it was unveiled at the company's conference in Las Vegas. The feature in development would allow the virtual assistant to mimic any voice after listening to a short provided recording. In a video demonstration, a child asked Alexa, "Can Grandma finish reading me The Wizard of Oz?" Alexa then switches to another voice mimicking the child's grandmother. It could also mimic your favorite celebrity or radio anchor, but critics warn it could also be used for scams.
Fox's Tom Graham, and I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
We're already Pica's best radio station, but we're always looking for ways to be even better. Announcing the point on Alexa. In addition to our FM and HD radio feeds, our incredible app, informative website, Facebook Live, and YouTube Live, you can now tell Alexa to stream the point. And your smart speaker will start playing whatever we're saying. News and views 24/7 with your 4-word command. Alexa, stream the point. Come try Guam's original Chamorro restaurant with Pica's best 5 years running. Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro. Experience Chef Peter's candied salmon over scallion coconut rice, octopus to naktak, Chamorro platter, and their award-winning gourmet hamburgers. Or if you're looking for something healthy, try their keto-friendly menu. Come and enjoy Mezcla's half-a-day service at their Hagåtña and Grand Plaza Tumon location. Call their Hagåtña location at 479-2652 for reservations.
Gas is expensive, so let the bank come to you. Through our remote deposit capture, you can deposit your checks into your account from your phone. And with our Dynamite Bank Pacific Visa debit card, you can use your money anytime, anywhere. It's the perfect combo.
Now we're banking on the future. Services to choose. Bank Pacific, where others put branches, we place roots.
Equal housing lender. Member FDIC. Crank it up.
Welcome to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the only show on talk radio where common sense is a lot more common. Phone lines are now open at 888-TALK. That's 888-8255. And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitzkie.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. I just have this sneaking suspicion that today a lot more people know the words in the Second Amendment than they did yesterday.
If they're paying attention.
If they're paying attention. And if they're not paying attention, the Democrats will bring it to their attention as they kvetch. Okay, so let's see what the Daily News isn't doing today. What they're passing off as an editorial in today's paper. Semi Ikotny. Let's just start out by looking at the picture that they run online on the run issue with the editorial. What is that a picture of? That's the governor's State of the Territory speech, right?
Yep, the opening.
Yeah.
The opening act.
Uh-huh.
The warm-up.
Yeah. the first act, the native dancers or the assault on the speaker or whatever it was. I'm not exactly sure. So here it goes. Governor Leon Guerrero delivered her fourth State of the Island address at the Guam Congress Building Wednesday night. As with all speeches of this nature, delivered to a crowd of supporters and members of the legislature who sit across the political aisle, there were cheers, applause, and of course, mixed reactions. From $500 rebates for residential power bills to free trash collection for a year, the governor's address pulled out all the stops indicative of an election year speech. We cannot argue that these solutions are badly needed. Working families have been struggling to keep the internet connected, have food on the table, and put gas in their tanks for the past 2 years. We can all agree that if not for hundreds of millions in federal aid that flowed through our government's coffers, Guam would be in a considerably more difficult position. More importantly, we are in a position to make the most of the pandemic hand we've been dealt if we work together. Towing political party lines and making campaign promises won't define who we are or what becomes of Guam in the years ahead. This community's progress will not belong to any one person or political party. Guam's progress and what we've done with all we've been given will be defined on how prepared our children are to carry on the fight for a better life beyond the Wuhan virus era. We need leaders who are willing to work together to point out solutions instead of pointing fingers. I like to point fingers. Yeah. Don't tell us you weren't involved in the decision-making. Our people are searching for jobs and have moved on from closed doors. Our leaders need to do the same. Don't send political punchlines for media attention. Send feasible plans that are realistic and sustainable. As per our little chat before the show started, Jose, what are Governor Leon Guerrero's plans for the future? Yeah. And after I thought about it a little bit, I thought the point you made was exactly correct. The future ends on November 4.
Everything expires.
Yeah, that's the end. It's kind of like Francis Fukuyama, the end of history.
But if you act now,
yeah,
you can extend.
Yeah, you could extend it for another 4 years if you really try hard. Our people are searching for jobs and move beyond closed doors. Our leaders need to do the same. Yeah, let's not have any more closed door meetings, Governor. Power rebates, free services, and extending the program in Salapi are a bridge to get us through these trying times. But the federal well of money that candidates are laying claim to will eventually dry up. We need to hear more about how our leaders plan to work together for a more sustainable future. Every time you use the word sustainable, you lose me. I don't buy into this whole I know it's the buzzword of 2022, but I don't buy it.
It's another platitude.
Exactly.
You know what? I don't understand why they continue to miss really great opportunities to really say something about this speech. At least they called it an election year speech.
Yeah.
At least.
Yeah.
But to say that that this is a bridge, what everything was said was a bridge, it's more like when the emergency door opens for the airplane and the raft comes down.
Yeah.
That's all it is a rubber slide. It's not meant to be there permanently. It's not a plan.
Yeah. Okay, I'm looking around for some materials I brought in on the Second Amendment. Oh, yeah, here they are. I got them. Okay, so I should have done this right after the Second Amendment, but I did want to get the editorial out of the way. So before we go into the card, let's go back to the Second Amendment. And once again, so you don't forget what it says, it goes like this. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, I've been very critical of both Scalia and Alito's interpretations of the Second Amendment. I think they are reading things out of the Second Amendment that are actually there and reading things into the Second Amendment that aren't there, which, of course, I guess is a necessary skill if you're on the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court, when it dealt with Griswold versus Connecticut, was able to find the word privacy in there, and no one else in the history of mankind has ever found it there. So I guess that's just part of a Supreme Court justice's kit. But the Heller decision and McDonald versus Chicago are the law of the land. Each of them said that, basically said that the government can't stop you from keeping a pistol in your house for self-defense. Heller said that about the national government because it arose in the District of Columbia. That's why it's called Heller versus the District of Columbia. And then McDonald versus Chicago, via the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment, applied that same rule to the states. So although the Second Amendment talks in terms of keeping and bearing arms and starts out with the word militia, somehow Scalia was able to find that the reason for the Second Amendment is for personal defense, for each person to defend himself. And although the words bear arms ordinarily apply to soldiers, Scalia said, no, it applies to every oscillating Richard in the country. And Alito pretty much said the same thing in McDonald versus Chicago. So it is the law of the land. And, you know, I'm a little bit of cognitive dissonance here. I don't like the way the decision came out, neither one of them. I think they're wrong, but I do like the result. Because I think in order for us to continue to live in a free country, we got to be able to keep our guns. It might be different if we were writing a constitution and there were no guns, or the number of guns was small, but there have always been a lot of guns in the United States of America. You know, when I was 12 years old, my dad took me down to Baxter's Sports Shop and bought me a single-shot .22 bolt-action rifle so I could go out hunting squirrels and rabbits with it. That's the way things were back in those days, at least in that part of the country. And no one thought anything of it. You know, when I wasn't using my .22 rifle, it hung on a nail over the TV set. You got to put it somewhere, you know. And you know, I never literally shot myself in the foot. When I was younger, I probably did it on occasion figuratively. But I don't have ventilated shoes. So guns were just a part of life in the part of the country where I grew up. Come fall, around Thanksgiving time, the men in town would pack up their rifles, their 30-30s, their 303 Savages, whatever, and take off for what we used to call the North, up north. Up north in Wisconsin is high north of US 10, maybe? US Highway 8 for sure. There's an argument about that. How far up there you got to go before you're up north. One of the key destinations up north was a little town called Hurley, which is right on the border with the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Ironwood, Michigan is across the border. And Hurley and Ironwood were iron mining towns. Needless to say, Hurley, unlike most of Wisconsin, had its share of vice. Hurley was a little town. Back in the days when I was in high school, Hurley had about 2,500 people and about 150 taverns, licensed taverns. So the men in our town would pack up every year right around Thanksgiving time and go up north deer hunting. A lot of them even got out in the woods. Where's the real Joe Cruz there? Yeah. And it was certainly a rite of passage. So if you were able to shoot a deer, the guys were lucky and got a deer. Now, every hunting season, we shot almost as many hunters as we did deer, even though they had to wear red and black check jackets.
I did not know that Dick Cheney's from Wisconsin.
Yeah. So if you're lucky enough to shoot a deer instead of another hunter, then the convention was you strapped it to the right front fender of your car. And you drove all the way back down to Elkhorn. Of course, in the wintertime, that wasn't a problem because it was so cold the deer would freeze. And then when you got back to your Elkhorn or wherever your hometown was, you'd do several victory laps around town, honking your horn so everybody could come out and say, "Hey, look at that. Jose got a deer." Now, one of my real close high school friends' name was Buck Gregerson. His real name was Bob, but almost everybody called him Buck. And the story was that when Doc Gregerson, who was Buck's dad, was Mapotgi, Doc went upstairs hunting deer. And Doc was a lucky one. And sure enough, when he came back, the word in town was, "Hey, Doc got a buck." And the lady said, "Yeah, and so did Teddy." A little bit of small town humor there in the face of a momentous Second Amendment decision, Jose. So, with guns being everywhere and people not freaking out, because you could go into the Montgomery Ward store in my hometown and buy a rifle. You didn't need a license. You didn't need any special permits. You didn't need anybody's blessing or anything like that. You could just do it. And no one freaked out about it. And it was not a bad thing. And there were occasional hunting accidents, and once in a long, long time, a suicide. But if you were around in that era, if you were around 50 years ago, 60 years ago, 70 years ago, you would know for sure that guns don't cause these massive shootouts. There's somebody pulling the trigger every single time. But let's say that we all got together and got the idea we need to collect every single gun in this country. We need to have Congress pass a law that says guns are contraband and that the mere possession of a firearm under any circumstance would land you in the pokey for at least 5 years. And we said every single law enforcement agency in the country, state, local, township, county, whatever, has an absolute responsibility to go out and collect guns. How do you think it would work? It would not work. It would be an impossibility. It could not be done. So then, when we have these shootings, these mass shootings, and we've talked about that on the show here. It's not the guns, folks. It's what's happened to our society. Our society is coming apart around the edges. And once upon a time, I mentioned an article that I read that characterized most of these mass shooters, especially the school shooters. They're all boys. We haven't had a female shooter yet. They're all boys. They're all boys who grew up without fathers. They're all boys who would be characterized by folks who knew them as misfits. They don't fit in very well, and there's some other things that tie them together too. That's why we have these things. Now, I think some of these video games don't help at all. Where you sit down in front of a screen and you visualize shooting people with an automatic weapon. Bang, 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 and people fall dead. Young brains, programmable brains that haven't fully matured, have to be affected by that. There's no way they couldn't be affected by that. But the politicians, mostly the Democrats, we got to do something. And I think we got to do something. They all say amongst themselves, sotto voce, we got to do something, even if it's wrong. Otherwise, it'll look like we're not doing anything here. And I told my story about Dick Nixon and price controls. When he put price controls in place in 1971, all of his advisors said, because we had a runaway inflation then, like the Biden inflation, all of his advisors said, Mr. Nixon, price controls don't have an effect. It won't work. Well, let me study it. So he studied it for 3 or 4 days, called them all back together. He said, go with the price controls. But Mr. Nixon, it won't work. Yeah, I know. But the people have to see that I'm doing something. And that's this whole craze about we got to have we got to have red flag laws where, we'll do the standard Red Queen trick. First, the punishment. We'll go out and collect people's guns. Then the verdict. Are they actually dangerous people?
Have these been ever challenged in the courts as far as the the Fifth Amendment, is it, or Fourth?
Well, I think depends. It would be for the states. It would be the 14th. Shall not deny a person life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And then, like ours, you get into the Sixth Amendment. You just the one that the kids came up with. You just the accuser just waltzes into a magistrate, and it's like a law school constitutional law exam. How many violations can you find in this statute? And then, as I mentioned the other day, this will turn out to be a weapon in divorce cases. If you want to get, if the female wants to have an edge on the male, I'm afraid of him.
The accusation alone.
Yeah, I'm afraid of him. He's got a gun. He said that he's going to shoot me. Please, Your Honor, Mr. Magistrate, take that gun away from. Oh, where does he keep it? Yeah. This is just, as we used to say, it's not a way to run a railroad at all. Okay, I got a lot more to say about the Second Amendment, but let's see. I've got Kellis on the line. I don't want to keep him too long here. Prohibition and gun confiscation. Tell me about it, Kellis.
How do, Judge?
I'm doing great.
What I was saying is that taking away something has always worked. I mean, just look at prohibition.
Yeah.
They made alcohol absolutely illegal. Nobody could have it. So the only people that made money out of it was the criminals, because they were willing to do it. And then, but everyone partook. Everyone knew where the speakeasies were, etc. And when I was first sitting there, because you started talking about that all the school shooters were young men, and I'm like going, how do you know that, Judge? What if they identified as a woman? Then your statement would be wrong.
Let me correct myself. All of them identify as men. We don't. Even a Supreme Court justice wouldn't be able to tell.
Yeah, I mean, if a Supreme Court justice cannot tell you what gender actually is, then I don't know. There probably is no. And then what makes it interesting is then how can we have 64 or 100 and something genders? I think there should just be human as your gender. What do you think?
Yeah, and this whole gender thing now, it's hard to draw a link to that between these mass shootings. But I'm going to posit that there is a link. Because those who would bring about all of this confusion about things that we ought to be able to depend on create the kind of uncertainty in which people who aren't very well adjusted are liable to go off the deep end.
But if they did not have access to a weapon of any kind, so we got rid of all the rocks and all the guns and all the knives and all the vehicles. Because, that's something that we don't talk about. More people are killed every year in the United States by vehicles than by guns.
Certainly in Waukesha.
Eliminate all guns.
Certainly in Waukesha, Kellis. Remember when that SUV mowed down all those people?
all by itself.
Yeah.
It has absolutely nothing to do with the driver.
Yeah.
So there you go. And then just think of it. We could be killing two stones with one bird by getting rid of all the vehicles.
Time out. I gotta take a laugh. I gotta take a laugh break here.
If you cannot keep going because I told a joke, everyone on the radio station will be mad at me. So take a breath there, Judge.
Okay. Good talking to you, Kellis.
Okay, Judge. You have a good day. Bye.
Subway's Eat Fresh Refresh brings you the sequel to the Sweet Onion Chicken Teriyaki. Enjoy the new Sweet Onion Steak Teriyaki. Delight your taste buds with tender, juicy steak marinated in the tangy new Sweet Onion Teriyaki sauce and stacked high on toasted artisan Italian bread, topped with American cheese, green peppers, red onions, and drizzled with the tangy new Sweet Onion Teriyaki sauce. The new Sweet Onion Steak Teriyaki is the height of food craveability. Give in to your cravings at Subway. Eat fresh.
Listen to The Point anytime, anywhere on Odyssey. Odyssey is your new audio home for all the music, news, sports, and podcasts that matter to you. Find your favorite stations like The Point and discover more. Music stations, local and trusted news sources, sports talk and team coverage, plus today's biggest podcasts. Find it all on the Odyssey app. AUDACY. We now return to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, soaring over the confusion with his superpowers of truth. Call 888-TALK. That's 888-8255.
Yeah, well, here we are. Thanks again, Kellis. I think I'm a pretty clever guy, twisting the words around, trying to squeeze a laugh out of just about anything I say, but that's the best one I've heard in a couple of years. If we do that, we can kill two stones with one bird. Yeah, so Kellis made a point. We tried this confiscation thing before with prohibition, with the 18th Amendment, and that lasted until 1933 when it was repealed. And once again, going back into my past, there was a bar in the town next to my hometown called the Delavana Club. And the rumor was that even if you weren't 21, you could go in there and get something to drink. I don't know how true that was. But this is the era when bars had neon signs on the front. And there was a big sign that said Delavana Club. And then right beside it, in smaller font, it said, since repeal. This was in the 50s. So prohibition was 1933, when I started high school, 1953, it was still fresh in our minds, I think.
So they never closed.
Yeah. So talk about the doctrine of unintended consequences. The whole idea behind no more alcohol in the United States probably was a salutary idea. I think probably just about everybody would be better off if they didn't drink alcohol. But, of course, it's got to be an individual choice, because what happened was that with something that had always been there, and that's a big difference. And I see that as a big difference between alcohol and marijuana. Alcohol has been around, going all the way back to biblical times. It's always been there. But to take something away that has always been there, especially when it's part of an important part of people's lives, it's going to be a hard uphill fight. And what happened was, instead of it working out the way it was supposed to work, as Kellis pointed out, you got illegal folks selling alcohol illegally, and these guys were called bootleggers. Because the way they transported the alcohol around, they would take a hip flask, stick it in a boot, where it wouldn't draw much attention to itself as they made their deliveries. And then there were speakeasies, and if you look around in the U.S., you can still find places that will tell you, yeah, this was a speakeasy back during Prohibition. The 21 Club in New York was a speakeasy, believe it or not, high-class club. So you'd knock on the door and a peek hole would open and you'd say, Joe sent me. Oh, okay, come on in. But what happened as soon as it became apparent that there was money to be made illegally from the sale of alcohol, the mafia, which had been around for quite some time, but the mafia really came into its own. That's where the mafia made the kind of capital that it needed to invest in legitimate businesses, the drug trade, and all kinds of other things. So we got rid of Prohibition, but we still haven't gotten rid of the mafia. So these are the old saying about those who don't remember the lessons of history are doomed to repeat them. George Santana, I have to stop and think about that, because what will happen is that folks will be selling guns illegally if you make them that hard to get. And of course, we already know that no matter how stiff the gun laws are in any particular city, criminals don't pay any attention to them at all. We have a very hard gun law here. If you even pick up a firearm and you don't have a firearms ID, that's a third-degree felony. So you got to have a firearms ID just to buy a pistol or a rifle. And after you buy it, you got 3 days to take it to the police department and register it. And if you're caught with an unregistered firearm, if you're caught carrying a firearm with no ID, you in a heap of trouble. But how often do we find people that are stopped, are arrested for Schedule II violations, more than likely ICE, when there's also a count of unregistered firearm? So we're not keeping the guns out of the hands of the bad people. So going back here to the Second Amendment, of course, everybody has jumped out and covering it on the internet. There's plenty to read. So I picked out some, what I think are some pretty good treatments of the whole phenomenon. And I start out with, let's see here. Let's start out with the fun part. Democrats lose their minds. Department of Justice makes concerning statement on Scottish gun rights decision. And let me see who else wants to chime in here. Senator Duenas. All right. Good afternoon, Senator Duenas.
Half a day, Your Honor, Honorable Marine, my favorite talk show host, and Senator. I wish you were back in the legislature or running, but I know that you made that decision to be honorable and only go with the 2 terms and do the great job that you did. I don't know how you're finishing the show. I'm still laughing at Kellis. I was like, I'd be done. I think if it was Ray, he'd be like, we're done. We're going to leave for the day. We can't improve on that. Anyway, I'll give you a last break just by, permission to go back to the crappy editorial today in the PDN.
Go ahead.
Okay. I get it in terms of how they laid it out. And like you said, working together is great. If it's a two-way street. And I had the pleasure today of spending lunch hour with Troy over on Candid to go over the kind of the Republican response to the governor's speech. And we gave credit where credit was due. We talked to him, I did the analysis kind of what Tall Tales did in terms of presentation, the look, everything else. But after that, we got into the, real lack of any really meat on the bones on the campaign speech. But one thing that I noticed in the PDN today that just continues to, kind of get under my craw as well is, it seemed like they made a comment of just because you're not included in the process. And I think that's where the article, that editorial completely missed what Senator Jim, myself, other really, outspoken members, Senator Brown, Senator Bloss, a number of us on the Republican caucus side were barking about, which was not being part of the process is exactly what gets us into trouble every time. And I pointed out to Troy that if you really look at what the governor's habit has been on the 2021 unaudited excess funds, requiring a legislative match of $25 million to the LEAP program, even though she had hundreds of millions of dollars still available under ARP, constantly coming back and using the taxpayers' money to match those, that distribution when she has the money outright. She did it to UOG when it came to the, capital improvement projects to complete a lot of the, engineering school and others. And legislature, we need $5 million. And it's like, you have the money, Governor. And it was because all of the revenues that were being earmarked during trying to spend the 2021 unaudited revenue surplus were always saying EITC or general fund. And then we realized EITC can't even be a funding source anymore because it comes back as a trust fund, which means it's non-appropriate. You can't appropriate that. You got to use that specifically for, the good job that Mike St. Nicholas and others did in Washington, D.C. to make sure it was included. So all across the board, and now I pointed out to Troy how, Your Honor, basically, even in this, we're in the current fiscal year, and we've basically over appropriated, tracking $85 million in surplus. It's of all the bills that have been introduced and what the governor sent down to us, introduce a bill and I'll give a power rebate program under the general fund excess revenues. That's close to $200 million now competing for the possible $85 million unaudited current year potential surpluses. I mean, this is exactly what got us into these huge deficits in the past, is just this absolute cavalier spending, complete election year propaganda that's being put out. And I'm going to use the term, it's just asinine at this point in terms of the craziness that's out there. And so that was, other than the, minor compliments of some of the, individual discussions during that presentation, we've gone bonkers. I mean, we have a bill now that says $700 for all taxpayers, totaling $54 million. Pay raises for the teachers, which all of us support, but done by executive order, $35 million. $14 to $15 million for law enforcement. There's $25 million now for a power rebate. And then every single agency, I was shocked yesterday when Department of Public Works came down and they actually had a status quo request. Every other agency has been between 5 and 20% increase in their budget, which if you base it on the $700 million of basically local funds and matching available for appropriation straight away, if you were conservative and said take an average of 10% increase across the board, that's another $70 million. It's bonkers. And I just think the governor completely missed an opportunity to talk about some bigger things and some bigger projects. And, once again, throughout the issue of the hospital, and I'm this medical complex I'm going to do under my administration. And we all know that we haven't even figured out the footprint of the land, in terms of where said project would go. So, PDN, I just think in that editorial, they completely missed the idea that anybody standing up on a political pedestal or soapbox to get upset about not being part of the process, because not doing things through the legislative process of appropriation is exactly what ruins our ability to really have steady forecasts going forward. My final summation is, I think one of the most sinister things involved here on this complete attempt to spend this money is because of the governor's position that she just absolutely does not want to reduce the BPT from 5 to 4% and allow the businesses to recover and let the economy to organically recover based on the ability of that money to circulate, allow the businesses to hire more people, give raises to people they need to, do whatever critical things they need to do by having that revenue back. And some businesses, it might mean just their survival overall. And so I just think there's so much built into spend it and make sure that we just can constantly say, oh, I'm sorry, we just can't roll that back because that money's committed.
Yeah, well, I agree with just about everything you said, Jose. I want to talk a little bit about this idea of working together. That sounds so good. It makes your tummy warm, etc. But it's not the way our government is set up. It is deliberately set up so that it is not easy to work together.
Right.
And I would deviate for a second and remind our international radio listening audience of Daryl Taggarty and the Daryl Taggarty's positing the existence of Tijeras Taggarty.
Right.
He said in order for the legislature to work right, it's got to be like a scissors, two really sharp blades working against one another. So, so when you have too much of this working together, when the executive and the legislative work together too much, one, you don't get the kind of creative thinking that brings about the best ideas. Two, it makes it too easy for people to do things that shouldn't be done. There has to be some tension, and the fact that every bill that goes through the legislature doesn't go through 15-0 is not a sign of malfunction. There's an awful lot to be said by 8-7. When a bill passes 8-7, it shows that, there was some thought put into it. Except in one case, one instance, that is when the people who don't know how to figure out how to vote until the roll is called are part of the legislature.
Yeah, and just in closing, I completely agree with you. I mean, it's the genius of the tripartite system, particularly amongst the two branches. I completely agree with you, and I have no problem being argumentative and obstinate for the purposes of having public discourse. And the final thing that, is the school of Bob Klitzkie that I've always agreed with this. If correctly done, and definitely in a part-time situation, I believe, and you've made the case for that, correctly done, the legislature is literally the most powerful branch of government if done right.
It doesn't need anybody else to have its way.
Absolutely. And if it wants to exercise the full power of the purse, there is no question as long as you can get 10 votes.
Yep.
You get 10 individuals that will sit down at the table and agree that, this is what needs to get done, an override-proof situation. The governor is basically impotent to move forward without working with the legislature, and that's why it's going to be critical in this next election that we select wisely.
I agree, Chris.
Thanks a lot, Your Honor. Glad to join you, and I'm commiserating now because it's going to be the weekend and we won't have tall tales, but we'll be raring for Monday.
We'll tough it out again. Thanks a lot for calling. Okay, let's take a short break here, and we'll be back in 30 seconds.
Choice Broadcasting introduces their unbeatable lineup of morning shows.
Hands down winners of Guam's morning radio battle.
Daryl Lizama grooves his way through Boss 104 playing Guam's favorite classic hits.
Morning Mouth Ray Gibson shakes the cage on 93.3 The Point.
And now, we are proud to announce the Morning Blender with Kyle Mandapat, mixing it up at sunrise on Star 101.
If you're an advertiser trying to reach the most valuable ears, we've got the shows that listeners have been tuning into for decades.
One call gets all three.
671-888-7346. That's 888-RGIO.
Are you looking for a new place to hang out with your friends? Let's go along the sidelines at Sidelines Bar and Grill. Located at 154 Iriarte Road, Unit 4 and 5 in Tamuning behind Royal Base. Sidelines, a hidden gem with nothing but great things to offer. Great atmosphere, great food, top shelf drinks, and a great team. What are we waiting for? Let the fun begin at Sidelines Bar and Grill. Open daily from 3 p.m. to 2 a.m. See you there.
So here the entertainer brings us back to the Sting, which was shot in that era, that Prohibition era. I mean, it was set in the Prohibition. It wasn't made, it was set in the Prohibition era. And I've got to clear up something here. I thought I was making myself understood when I picked up Tellus's analogy between prohibition and gun control. And the point that I made was that prohibition didn't work very well, and gun control will have the same problems because both guns, firearms, and alcohol were legal. They had made it. They were approved by, they had societal approval and had societal approval for a long, long time. You know, as far as alcohol is concerned, you go back to biblical times. It wasn't something that people snuck around to do. It was, alcohol was something that was done by the most prominent people in any particular community. So alcohol was there. To take away something that's there is a whole lot harder than to ban something that you haven't had. So I use that analogy because it's the same as guns. And that's why I spent a little time talking about how ubiquitous firearms are in the United States. To take away something that's there, that's been legal for a long, long time, will work out any better than prohibition worked out. Now, Mike Pritchard comes along. You always got the marijuana defenders here, so that whenever the word marijuana is used or cannabis, it's kind of a dog whistle, and hey, I gotta get in here and put in the rap for marijuana. And Mike Pritchard says cannabis has been around since biblical times. Well, actually, that's not correct. Cannabis has been around since way, way before biblical times. It's a plant that grows wild. But I don't remember, in fact, I haven't looked for it, but I don't recall any biblical passages that talk in terms of, of cannabis, marijuana being part of the societal rituals or undertakings of the time. I think I'm pretty firm ground if I say marijuana hadn't made it at that time, and it hadn't made it in any society up until now. So what we're trying to do with cannabis is we're trying to take something that has been illegal for a long, long time and make it legal. That's a whole lot different than taking something that has been legal for a long, long time and making it illegal. And that's the reason that I went to alcohol. It was not to start another debate about cannabis. I've already ruled on cannabis. I'm not going to overturn my earlier ruling on cannabis. Okay, let's see. I've got another Joe. It's what a certain caller hasn't done. Wow. Tell us more, another Joe. I think the dog is getting ready to bark.
I wouldn't doubt there are a bunch of dogs around her. So, Bob, I'm surprised that the repeat isn't on hold. Waiting to contest the good honorable senator was saying about Michael St. Nicholas doing a good job.
Yeah. Well, it's not what Repeat did on the show. It's what Repeat didn't do, right?
Maybe it's too soon, right? Maybe he's on hold right now.
Yeah, well, maybe he'll hear that as a dog whistle and dial in and say, okay, here I am. Michael St. Nicholas is not doing a good job.
There you go.
Yeah.
So what was your ruling, Bob? Or you don't want to go back and repeat the ruling?
In the legislature?
Regarding the cannabis, marijuana.
Well, when I ran, I had self-imposed term limits. I said from the get-go, I'll do it 2 or 3 times if I'm lucky enough to be elected. That should be enough for anybody. And that's consistent with my philosophy. My philosophy is, in a small town like this, being a senator should be something that a lot of people take a crack at. That it should not be a profession, it should not be an occupation, What we need is a citizens' legislature. I was a citizen before I started. I did 2 terms. I reverted to being a citizen. I'm still a citizen. I'm obviously an engaged, active, outspoken, loudmouth citizen. And I think it's possible to have an impact on what goes on in the political world here without sitting in the legislature and saying pass every time you hear somebody call out your name.
I do recall you saying that the job of a senator is to appropriate expenses or
funds,
money to the nomination, to confirm nominations, and to vote on the bill in front of them in the session.
Exactly. And if they can't do that until they hear their name called, they probably should observe some term limits themselves.
So that should be the standard for all the candidates, that we should follow those principles.
Absolutely.
Right? To do our best to do that. Before I stop bugging you about, so regarding alcohol, to my understanding, 1800s, alcohol was safer to drink than water in the United States. Does that sound about right to you?
That sounds right. And I've read that back in colonial times, beer was a typical breakfast drink.
Even for children.
Probably for the same reason.
But not recommended nowadays.
No.
And the other point was, I apologize again, your point of view, how much are you willing to share about the marijuana issue?
Say again?
How much are you willing to rule or say about the marijuana issue?
What am I willing to say about it?
Yes,
Well,
sir.
I'll say it again. Right now, marijuana is a Scheduled 1 controlled substance, which means that the gurus back in our national capital have decided that it has no salutary use, even for research. And I think that's a mistake. People keep making these medicinal claims, so I would, if I could have my way, I would take it off Schedule 1. I would do extensive research. And if, in fact, it does have medicinal property, we know how to deal with drugs. We've got a Food and Drug Administration that does a pretty good job on those things. So we would make it available and regulate it just like any other drug. If it doesn't have any medicinal value, then we stop talking about it. That's point number one. Point one. Point 2 is this. When you have a statute on the books that is universally ignored, there's a word for that. It's called anarchy. And I don't favor anarchy even for things that I like. Anarchy only can lead to more anarchy. So if people get the idea, well, yeah, marijuana is against the law, it's against the law of the national government, but yeah, we don't like it, so we're going to have our own laws. What else can we do that with? Maybe we could do that with something else that we want to do that's against the law. Anarchy, it's not a good path to be following.
So in other words,
3.
In other words, enforce the law.
One more, another, Joe.
Sorry.
We have so much problems here on the island with mind-altering drugs, primarily ice. Older folks would remember the hell that we went through with heroin back in the day. I don't know that anybody benefits by introducing another and popularizing and normalizing the use of another mind-altering drug. I don't see how that can help. I perhaps could be persuaded on that, but it would be a heavy burden for anyone to persuade me on that one. And to tell me that, well, it's not as bad as alcohol, that's not an argument. That's a feeling. Go ahead, another, Joe.
Okay, well, I just wanted to thank you for your time on your show, for letting me to participate, share, and gain your wisdom. And I wanted to tell everyone out there listening to Tall Tall, everyone in the Tall Tall audience, nation, listen to your elders. Okay, goodbye, thanks. I'll just keep listening.
Yeah, good call, another, Joe. Listen to your elders. Let's see. Bonnie Suba said, remember alcohol back in the day? Used for pain relief. Remember Matt Dillon? He gets shot, rides to the saloon, and calls Doc. Doc tells Miss Kitty to bring the whiskey and pour it over the wound, and tells Matt to drink a swig. And miraculously, the bullet is removed. Matt Dillon gets better. Let's see. Matt Dillon gets on his horse. Those were the days. Matt Dillon, Miss Kitty. Yeah. Doc.
Take a swig, find your horse.
Yeah. All right, it's about time for the big halftime show, isn't it, Jose? All right.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Gun bill passes the Senate. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News. By a 65-33 vote, the Senate approving the Safer Communities Act to enhance background checks for gun buyers and provide money for states to implement laws to take guns away from people judged to be a threat.
This is not a cure-all for all the ways gun violence affects our nation, but it is a long overdue step in the right direction.
Senate Majority Leader Schumer, President Biden issuing a statement late Thursday urging the House to pass the bill quickly. That could come as early as today. The president disappointed by a decision from the U.S. Supreme Court Thursday, striking down a New York state law that required gun owners to prove they had a special need for a concealed carry permit.
This is a big win for Second Amendment enthusiasts across the country. It overturns a law on the books from New York State going back to 1913. The majority opinion written by Justice Clarence Thomas lays out an argument that the law violated the 14th Amendment to the Constitution.
Fox's David Spunt in Washington. Concealed carry laws in 6 other states could be affected as well as New York's. The High Court expected to issue more opinions today. There are 9 cases remaining, including Dobbs v. Jackson, the Mississippi abortion case that could result in the overturning of Roe versus Wade. Without cross-examination, top Justice Department officials told the House January 6th committee on Thursday they were hounded by then-President Trump to challenge the 2020 election results. Political troubles for Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson. His Conservative Party has lost 2 seats in Parliament in 2 special elections to replace members who'd resigned amid sex scandals. The chairman of the country's Conservative Party resigning, saying the party cannot carry on with business as usual. America is listening to Fox News.
Gas is expensive, so let the bank come to you. Through our remote deposit capture, you can deposit your checks into your account from your phone. And with our Dynamite Bank Pacific Visa debit card, you can use your money anytime, anywhere. It's the perfect combo.
Now we're banking on the future. Services to choose. Bank Pacific, where others put branches, we place roots.
Equal housing lender. Member FDIC. Crank it up.
Come try Guam's original Chamorro restaurant with Pica's best 5 years running. Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro. Experience Chef Peter's candied salmon over scallion coconut rice, octopus to naktak, Chamorro platter, and their award-winning gourmet hamburgers. Or if you're looking for something healthy, try their keto-friendly menu. Come and enjoy Mezcla's half-a-day service at their Hagåtña and Grand Plaza Tumon location. Call their Hagåtña location at 479-2652 for reservations.
New concerns about Iran's nuclear program.
Iran is closer than ever to having enough uranium to create a nuclear weapon, according to the UN's nuclear watchdog. As negotiations between the U.S. and Iran continue to stall, Iran's president met with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. The Biden administration is growing increasingly concerned that efforts to revive the 2015 Iran nuclear deal may be slipping out of reach. The U.S. chief negotiator, Robert Malley, issued a warning last month.
Iran could potentially produce enough fuel for a bomb before we can know it, let alone stop it.
Under the imperfect 2015 nuclear deal, also known as the JCPOA, it would have taken Iran a year to have enough fissile material for a bomb. At the Pentagon, Jennifer Griffin, Fox News.
More U.S. military hardware is headed for Ukraine.
This package contains weapons and equipment, including new high-mobility artillery rocket systems, tens of thousands of additional rounds of ammunition for the artillery systems that have already been provided as well, and patrol boats to help Ukraine defend its coast and its waterways.
White House Strategic Communications Coordinator John Kirby says this makes more than $6 billion in aid sent. Federal prosecutors asking the maximum federal sentence for former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin.
A sentencing date has not been set yet, though federal prosecutors are reiterating their request for 25 years in prison for Derek Chauvin, who pled guilty last year to violating George Floyd's civil rights, in which both sides agreed that Chauvin should face 20 to 25 years, time he'd serve along his 22.5-year state sentence. 3 other former officers were convicted in the federal case and also await sentencing. 2 of them, Tu Tao and J. Alexander King, still face state charges this fall of aiding and abetting both second-degree manslaughter and murder. One of them, Thomas Lane, pled guilty.
Fox's Jeff Manasso, and I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
Subway's Eat Fresh, Refresh brings you the sequel to the Sweet Onion Chicken Teriyaki. Enjoy the new Sweet Onion Steak Teriyaki. Delight your taste buds with tender, juicy steak marinated in the tangy new Sweet Onion Teriyaki sauce and stacked high on toasted artisan Italian bread, topped with American cheese, green peppers, red onions, and drizzled with the tangy new Sweet Onion Teriyaki sauce. The new Sweet Onion Steak Teriyaki is the height of food craveability. Give in to your cravings at Subway. Eat fresh.
Half a day. Patsy Gogri from Security Title here with information about what a title company does. The title side of our business determines who owns a property and guarantees your ownership with a title insurance policy. The escrow side acts as an independent third party, managing the transfer of money and documents between the buyer, seller, lenders, and others. Security Title has a management of real estate closings down to a science. Give us a call. We are here to help.
Listen to The Point anytime, anywhere on Odyssey. Odyssey is your new audio home for all the music, news, sports, and podcasts that matter to you. Find your favorite stations like The Point and discover more. Music stations, local and trusted news sources, sports talk and team coverage, plus today's biggest podcasts. Find it all on the Odyssey app. AUDACY.
Finale of that halftime show just gets better and better every time we play the game. Okay, I got Johnny Utah on the line, and Johnny Utah is going to be the warm-up for the Lou Leon Guerrero Life is Precious film, or video, excuse me.
And I hear it's not a chant.
Yeah, it's not a chant. It's not like something that she had at her State of the Territory. All the way from Utah, we have Johnny Utah. Busy as a bee, right, Johnny?
Yes, sir. Hey, so I got an email from Brighton. Are you familiar with those guys? They're like a pro-liberty think tank, I guess. They're a little bit to the far right, but when I read it, it was kind of scary. And it's regarding what the decision that's going to happen with Roe versus Wade. And I was wanting to know if I could read this email to you. It's not too long.
Yeah, you may.
So it's titled "Demolition of Supply Chains is Pre-Civil War Sabotage Against We the People." And it goes, "The United States of America is about to be plunged into a civil war. It will be ignited by the imminent Roe versus Wade nullification decision by the U.S. Supreme Court. Once the Roe decision is rendered, the radical left will erupt into full-blown domestic terrorism, launching unrestricted warfare against Christians, gun owners, and conservatives. What's coming will make the 2020 BLM and Antifa riots look like child's play. The sabotage of food facilities across the United States is deliberate. Similarly, the sabotage attacks, regulatory takedowns, and cyber warfare assaults on energy infrastructures are also being carried out by the regime in order to deprive the people of fuel and transportation. America's food and energy infrastructure is being disrupted, and sabotage blockade operations that are acts of war against the American people. This is almost identical to the way Lithuania is now running a railway blockade of Russia's access to Kaliningrad. The Obama/Biden regime is using sabotage operations to shape the domestic battlefield in preparation for the upcoming civil war. Period. That's the end.
Wow, that's heavy duty. Yeah, it's kind of conservative. You know, I'm really right wing. Can you send me a link?
But you know, sometimes these crazies that are on both sides they get part of it right. They may not be 100% right, but they get part of it right. I agree that it's far right, but there is some truth to what they're talking about.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought that up, Johnny. I'd really like to explore that a little further. So when you're finished, tell Jose what your email or Jose will give you my email address, and you can email a link to me if you'd be so kind. Okay?
Yeah, I'll forward it to you. No problem.
I appreciate it. Okay, I'm going to give you back to Jose.
Okay.
Let's see here. I had something on Facebook I wanted to comment about, if I can find it here. About patenting and cannabis. Where in the heck is it? Well, here's what Dave Duane says. Senator Bob, I have to agree to disagree. We don't do that on Tall Tales. We don't agree to disagree. If you disagree, you disagree. You stand by your guns. And if I'm able to persuade you or you are able to persuade me, that's it. But this is what Duane says. Cannabis has helped in many cases of PTSD, epilepsy, appetite disorders, to name a few. Well, if that's the case, then go back to what I said about Schedule 1, and let's do some research. And if that's the case, if it has a medicinal aspect, fine, then let's sell it as medicine. But, you know, kind of this oral tradition thing is not a good way to deal with something, to deal with anything that has a mind-altering effect. I think we've kind of learned that the hard way. And let's see, who was talking about the patent on the cannabis? Anyhow, somebody said, I can't find it right now. I said, Can cannabis be patented? I thought it can't be because it's natural.
Oh, Banadosu Tautau said, I thought you can't patent MJ because it grows freely.
Okay, thank you, Jose. Yeah. Then you, and of course, you cannot. Excuse me. You cannot patent cannabis, and the rule is this: the U.S. Patent Office will not issue a patent on anything that occurs in nature. So if you were to find some magic spring somewhere, and you took one sip, it would cure cancer. The guy who found it couldn't patent it.
Now, I don't know if I've heard this in a fictional story or a news story, because sometimes the lines are blurred.
Mm-hmm.
But I hear some of the laboratory genetically mutated seeds when they plant that whatever they're growing, and it goes and makes itself in another farmer's field and grows, that the original owner of that seed, that mutated seed or the modified seed, can claim property because that's their modification,
their invention.
Their invention. And I'm not sure if that's a fictional thing I read or a news story, but that's the only thing that I've heard about in patenting agriculture in that sense.
I think that's what we call an old wives' tale.
Everybody knows.
Mm-hmm. So here's back to the law of patent. So if you find something in nature that has curative properties, the game for the drug companies is they have to modify it. They have to change one part of the molecular structure so it no longer occurs in nature. Then it can be patented. As an example, willow bark is one of the ingredients in aspirin. Well, you can't patent with willow bark, but you can patent the ingredients in aspirin. So drug companies will find these things, make the modification, get the patent. Of course, this is an extremely expensive proposition, and that's one of the reasons that some drugs are very expensive. There's also a tale floating around on the internet that the Food and Drug Administration has a patent on marijuana. So there's a kernel of truth in it, but that's about all. There is some modification or some derivative of marijuana that the Food and Drug Administration has patented because if they are ever going to do any research on it, they don't want to have to pay somebody else royalties. Now, with your story about, maybe we could use the word hybrid here. I could tell you a little bit about how hybrid corn is made, Jose, hybrid seed corn. You have two different varieties of seed corn. You plant 6 rows of seed corn that you pull all of the tassels out of. You plant 2 rows of seed corn that you don't pull the tassels out of. So the 2 rows pollinate the 6 rows, and they come up with a variety of corn that's different from either of the 2 rows. That would be a hybrid. Now, I suspect that you could do something similar with marijuana, but the person who creates the hybrid does not have a property right in that particular hybrid. I think that's one.
There is something, again, this is the internet, that says in 1980 there was a U.S. Supreme Court case ruling, Diamond versus Chakrabarti, that genetically altered life can be patented. And this might have to deal with that corn or things like that.
Yeah.
But that is something interesting. And this takes it to a whole other tangent of argument of GMOs, genetically modified things also, because that happens in nature too.
Yeah, it does. Okay, well, let's talk about the Second Amendment for a few minutes here. We've talked about so many other things already. And the New York Rifle and Pistol Association case, the Supreme Court struck down the New York statute. And I've got some articles here that cover it pretty well. I want to start out with the one that's most fun, and that's the one that ran in Red State. And it's titled, Democrats Lose Their Minds. Department of Justice makes concerning statement on Scottish gun rights decisions. I like the part about Democrats lose their minds, although the lawyer in me would object if this were in open court, because I would say, Your Honor, assumes a fact, not an evidence. The Democrats actually have minds. On Thursday, the Supreme Court delivered a major victory for gun rights. The court decided that the Second and 14th Amendments protect an individual's right to carry a handgun for self-defense outside the home, and that the New York law requiring a, quote, proper cause to obtain a concealed carry license was unconstitutional. Now, the way I read the decision, I confess I haven't read the entire decision. It's really, really long, but I have read the syllabus. And I think that the fact that the New York law dealt with concealed carry is not the basis for the ruling. I think the ruling deals with carrying a firearm outside your house. Concealed, not concealed, whatever. So I don't think this is limited just to concealed firearms. Just want to make that clear. The court decided that the Second and 14th Amendments protect an individual's right to carry a handgun for self-defense outside the home, and that the New York law requiring a proper cause to obtain a concealed carry license was unconstitutional. This is Nick Arama that wrote this. He said, my colleague Joe Cunningham. No, it's not Uncle Toad. Mataisi Uncle Toad. Rest in peace. My colleague Joe Cunningham reported on some of the unhinged reactions from the peanut gallery. Does anybody out there in international radio listening audience remember the peanut gallery?
Was that, oh my goodness, that puppet.
Howdy Doody.
Howdy Doody, there you go.
It's Howdy Doody time, yeah. Yeah, Howdy Doody.
Marionette, to be correct.
Exactly. Howdy Doody was a marionette. Buffalo Bob was the host of Howdy Doody time. And the part that guys my age, we were a little too old for Howdy Doody, but we really liked Princess Summer, Fall, Winter, Spring. If you can remember Princess Summer, Fall, Winter, Spring. He had Mr. Bluster. Mr. Bluster, who did a really good Joe San Augustine imitation.
That one I don't remember.
Well, you know Joe San Augustine, right? Yeah.
Bluster.
Yeah. Can you imagine a marionette that talked like Joe San Augustine? Yeah. And then the kids all sat out in the audience, which was referred to as the peanut gallery. Yeah, that's a great term. Okay, so my colleague Joe Cunningham reported on some of the unhinged reactions from the peanut gallery, including Keith Ogerman, former acting Solicitor General Neil Katyal, and former U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara. Bharara said, Scottus read neither the room nor the Constitution correctly. Now, let me talk about reading the room here. If you're a public speaker, rule number one in public speaking, know your audience. And the way you know your audience is you read the room. You try to figure out what kind of phraseology, technique, etc. will appeal to that audience. That's called reading the room. Okay, now the author here, Nick, goes on to say, funny and perhaps telling that Bharara doesn't understand that the court isn't supposed to be reading the room, but deciding purely on the Constitution, no matter what the room says. What a novel idea. In other words, the Supreme Court is not supposed to say, how can we make ourselves more popular? What do the people really want to hear from us?
Can you go outside and see what that sign says that protester is holding up?
Can you get a hold of Crystal Paco and have her come in here and help us write this decision and do as good a job as she did on the governor's speech? Reaction of the Democrats in power was both delusional and concerning. New York Governor Kathy Hochul, who is the first governor of New York in recent times, whose brother was not a TV host, and so far hasn't had to resign in shame. Kathy Hochul didn't take the decision well. Indeed, she said they would fight for even more restrictions despite the Supreme Court's decision. Hochul said that if the court wanted to consider the original meaning of the Constitution, she was willing to go back to muskets.
What?
Well, you know, this originalist, what did it mean to the people at the time that the Constitution was enacted?
I love how these people cite how to go back to the Constitution, and then they cite things that are not in the Constitution.
Yeah. So what she's trying to do here is that, you know, that Scalia was an originalist, and he said the way you determine what the meaning of the words used in the Constitution are is you go back and find out what they meant to the man of fair intelligence who was alive at that time. So Kathy thinks that that the Second Amendment, when it was ratified in 1791, everybody was thinking, well, it just means muskets, that's it. Right? Kathy revealed not only how extreme she is, but how ignorant she is of the law. Here's what she said. Let's see. Fine. Then she had to give up her cell phone, her microphone, and her Botox.
Ouch.
She might be in trouble. This is a false narrative that they push as though the founders couldn't anticipate harmful weapons when indeed they had cannon and people who could have those despite Joe Biden's lies to the contrary. 1791, if you had a cannon, fine. Happy cannon. Hochul goes on to falsely make a claim about restrictions on speech that Joe Biden often makes. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. Now, by the way, people insert the word crowded into that quote. Maybe it's Anne Marie Hattori that first popularized this quote. The word crowded isn't in the quote. Oliver Wendell Holmes' decision said, you can't yell fire in a theater. Yeah. Here's another quote from Kathy. Shocking, absolutely shocking that they have taken away our right to have reasonable restrictions. We can have restrictions on speech. And there's what Kathy says. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater, but somehow there's no restrictions allowed on the Second Amendment. Shocking. I'm always glad that I'm not the only guy who really likes the movie Casablanca. Shocking. Absolutely shocking that they have taken away those rights. Indeed, there is no such restriction. There is no Supreme Court case that says you cannot yell fire in either a theater or a crowded theater. No matter how many times Democrats lie about it and try to use it to justify their unconstitutional impulses. That expression stems from dictum. Now, when you read a opinion, there are things there is a convention used in writing opinions called obiter dictum, plural of which is obiter dicta. obiter dictum or obiter dicta are interesting things that the justice wants to put in the decision that don't become part of the decision, which is called the holding. So they're interesting, but not ruling. Okay, so the fire in a theater thing was dictum, meaning it's not binding as legal precedent. And the case was later on overturned. It was a case that arose in the Alien and in the Sedition Act days after World War I, when we had a really restrictive statute on speech. And this case arose out of that. And the statute, and it's the Supreme Court upheld the statute, but that decision was later on overruled. Now, that doesn't mean that tonight you should go down to the movies and in the suspenseful part stand up and holler, "Fire!" and then say, "I know it's okay because Bob told me it was all right on Tall." No, don't do that, please. So that statement never had the force of law. It's just something that people who want to grab your rights ignorantly say. It's disturbing that she either doesn't know that or that she doesn't care about the truth when she has a legal degree and should know. Then there was Joe Biden's reaction. Nowhere in this reaction does he say accepts the decision despite not liking it. The word statesman comes to mind here. Statesmen always say that. I really don't like the court decision. It's like me. I don't like the way Scalia came up with D.C. versus Heller, but I respect the decision. It is the decision of the Supreme Court. That is statesman-like conduct. There was Joe Biden's reaction. Nowhere in this reaction does he say he accepts the decision despite not liking it. He seems to have thrown that norm right out the window. Indeed, it sounds like he's calling for people to come out and protest this decision. Here's what he said, or here's what one of them said. I am deeply disappointed by the Supreme Court ruling. I call on Americans across the country to make their voices heard. Lives are on the line. This is from a guy named Devon Heinen. Biden said, I am deeply disappointed by the Supreme Court ruling. I call on Americans across the country to make their voices heard on gun safety, which is a tweet. Lives are on the line.
So when their voices are heard, who are they directing their voices to? SCOTUS?
Of course. Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense, Mr. President.
Yeah, this is the new way we run our country now. Remember what I said about anarchy a little earlier, Jose? That once you get started down that road, it's really, really hard to turn back. So this is the way the Supreme Court procedures work. A case goes to trial before a district court of the United States. One of the parties is disappointed. He appeals to one of the circuit courts of appeals. A losing party there has the right to then appeal to the Supreme Court of the United States, which will decide the case. And the party that loses there has the right to go out and try to make the justices' lives miserable as he can. And make as much a fuss, riots, etc. Go back and get the 2020 playbook from Black Lives Matter. That is the final court of appeals nowadays, apparently.
According to Chuck Schumer.
Yeah. Okay, let's head for Wrigley Field in the seventh inning stretch.
Choice Broadcasting introduces their unbeatable lineup of morning show. Hands down winners of Guam's morning radio battle. Daryl Lizama grooves his way through Boss 104 playing Guam's favorite classic hits.
Morning Mouth Ray Gibson shakes the cage on 93.3 The Point.
And now, we are proud to announce the Morning Blender with Kyle Mandapat, mixing it up at sunrise on Star 101.
If you're an advertiser trying to reach the most valuable ears, we've got the shows that listeners have been tuning into for decades.
One call gets all three. 671-888-7346. That's 888-REIO.
Are you looking for a new place to hang out with your friends? Let's go along the sidelines at Sidelines Bar and Grill. Located at 154 Iriarty Road, Unit 4 and 5 in Tamuning behind Royal Bigs. Sidelines, a hidden gem with nothing but great things to offer. Great atmosphere, great food, top shelf drinks, and a great team. What are we waiting for? Let the fun begin at Sidelines Bar and Grill. Open daily from 3 p.m. to 2 a.m. See you there.
Okay, so here we are at Wrigley Field in Chicago, the 7th inning stretch. This means just 2 more innings of Tall Tales for this whole week, and Jose and I go into hibernation again until 1600 on Monday. So picking up here again with this article, Dems lose their mind. DOJ makes concerning statement on Scottish gun rights decision. Here's the DOJ, Department of Justice. The DOJ issued a concerning statement again saying that they would uphold the decision, but saying they disagree. It isn't up to the DOJ to disagree. It's supposed to be an objective, non-political entity enforcing the law. They're not supposed to be making political comment. Why are they commenting at all on this? And are they saying they won't enforce the law or act in accordance with the decision? Just another example of hollowing out our institutions. Prosecutors that don't prosecute, a Department of Justice that doesn't see its job as enforcing the laws. They kind of consider, I guess, themselves the national talk show hosts. Tell people what they don't like.
This is the ghost of administrations past.
Exactly.
Obama early.
By Charles Dickens. Jennifer Van Laar mentions in her tweet the proposal wending its way through the Senate now that envisions the states imposing red flag laws, that the DOJ isn't interested in protecting your rights, and they show it by this statement. But given this case, will the red flag laws the Senate is envisioning even survive this decision? Or does it preemptively cut their legs out from under them? Without having seen the red flag law or read the entire decision of the Supreme Bruin decision, I suspect no. I suspect no. Now, those who challenge those red flag laws have certainly got a good basis for challenge, because there's something in the law called a constructional preference, that some things the law favors, some things the law doesn't favor. And obviously, as far as the law generated by the Supreme Court is concerned, it doesn't favor restrictions on bearing arms anymore. Those Democrat reactions are concerning, particularly following the Democrat reactions to the pending abortion case. Talking about tossing norms out the window. Will they be accepting the decisions? Are they going to enforce them or not? Is DOJ advocating nullification, or just trying to scaremonger by implying that federal gun laws are impacted by today's decision? This is an odd statement from an increasingly political agency, which should be anything but. So if I read one more like this, I'm going to add one more syllable to the name of that department, Jose. I'm going to put an IN in front of its name. The Injustice Department. Careful, guys. All right. Clarence Thomas. My favorite justice. This is an article that ran in Breitbart by a guy named A.W.R. Hawkins, who's their firearms guy. In the majority opinion for the Supreme Court, 6-3 ruling in NYSRPA, NYSRPA versus Bruin, Justice Clarence Thomas wrote, the Second Amendment protects an individual's right to carry a handgun for self-defense outside the home. Thomas pointed to District of Columbia versus Heller and McDonald versus Chicago, noting that in those cases, the Supreme Court recognized that the Second and 14th Amendments protect the right of an ordinary, law-abiding citizen to possess a handgun in home for self-defense. He then turned his attention to NYSRPA versus Bruin, saying, in this case, petitioners and respondents agree that ordinary law-abiding citizens, they're hard to find anymore, right?
Yeah, but even harder are the extraordinary law-abiding citizens.
Exactly. Have similar rights to carry handguns publicly for their self-defense. Thomas observed, we too agree and now hold, consistent with Heller and McDonald, that the Second and 14th Amendments protect individuals' rights to carry a handgun for self-defense outside the home. Later in the opinion, Thomas noted, although we remarked in Heller that the need for armed self-defense is perhaps most acute in the home, we did not suggest that the need was insignificant elsewhere. Many Americans hazard greater danger outside the home than in it. The Second Amendment reflects that reality. Therefore, the Second Amendment's plain text thus presumptively guarantees the NYSRPA petitioners a right to bear arms in public for self-defense. That's why I like Thomas. Thomas has this really interesting idea of how you interpret statutes and constitutions. First thing you do is you apply Justice Felix Frankfurter's rule, 3 rules of statutory interpretation. Rule number 1, read the statute. Rule number 2, read the statute. Jose, can you guess what rule number 3 is?
I'm going to not guess, but say, read the statute.
Here you go. So you read the statute, and if you can understand what the words say, that's it. You don't need to look for legislative history, or you don't need to go out and slaughter a pig and examine his entrails.
Read the tea leaves. Nope.
And to read the tea leaves. No. And if the language could bear more than one meaning, then according to Thomas, the way you figure it out is you go back and figure out what it meant at the time it was adopted to ordinary law-abiding citizens. And that makes a whole lot of sense. Now, back when I went to law school, we got really hung up on the legislative history. We'd read committee reports and all kinds of things, trying to figure out what the legislators meant when they enacted that statute. Now, if you stop to think about it, that is really bass-ackwards. Because it's not what it means to the people who make the laws, it's what it means to the people who are subject to the laws. So, that was just a complete blind alley, and the originalism makes a whole lot more sense. What did it mean to the people at the time it was passed? because that's the point where we start. That's how we figure out how we're going to apply it now. Now, to go back to Kathy's understanding, well, back in 1791, they were still using muskets. In order to fire a musket, you had to have a rod and a wad and some powder and a ball, and you stuffed it all down there and tamped it down with the rod, and then you had a flintlock. You had a hammer with some flint on it. When you pulled the trigger, the hammer came forward, the flint caused a spark to go into the chamber, ignite the powder, and boom! And then about a minute later, you were reloading, right? A minute later, you were done reloading. And she would say, well, that's what the Second Amendment means. You have a right to keep and bear a musket. Now, there are things called canons of construction. Canons of construction are kind of general rules that help you interpret what a statute says. And I'll give you a couple of examples. One of them is expresso unius est exclusio alterius. So if you have a list of terms, the ones that you specify in the list are the ones that count. If it ain't in the list, it doesn't count. Jose, I want you to go to Chodi. I want you to get a dozen eggs, a quart of milk, a pound of ham, a loaf of bread, a 6-pack of Coke. Make sure you get Pepsi. Yeah. Now hurry up. Okay, what should you bring back from Chodi? Just exactly what I told you. Expresso unius est exclusio alterius. Now, if I said, Jose, I want you to go down to Chodi and get me some groceries. Stuff like eggs, a dozen eggs, and a loaf of bread, and a 6-pack of Coke. Make sure you get Pepsi, pound of ham, etc. And you came home and you didn't bring a pound of coffee and you got scolded. Would that be fair? Yeah. This is the doctrine of a justum generis. A justum generis means the things of a general kind. So I'm going to tell you what to get, and then I'm going to give you some examples. Oh. Just the opposite of expresso. And, there are literally hundreds of these canons of construction. As another example, no word in the United States Constitution is superfluous. There's not a single word in there that doesn't have a meaning. So if you find a word, you got to figure out what it means. So one of the canons, and I can't really remember it that well, but one of the canons is that when you enact in general terms like keep and bear arms, that term is ambulatory. So it means arms at the time it was enacted, but it means such arms as we may encounter further down the line. So it's not frozen at muskets. So it's not a job for amateurs, although sometimes amateurs get to the Supreme Court and sometimes amateurs get to be the mayor of large cities like New York.
Or sometimes they get to be governors, even though they weren't elected.
Yeah, right. Okay, so the next item I have here, well, let's head for Churchill Downs.
Come try Guam's original Chamorro restaurant with Pica's best 5 years running. Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro. Experience Chef Peter's candied salmon over scallion coconut rice, octopus to naktak, Chamorro platter, and their award-winning gourmet hamburgers. Or if you're looking for something healthy, try their keto-friendly menu. Come and enjoy Mezcla's half-a-day service at their Hagåtña and Grand Plaza Tumon location. Call their Hagåtña location at 479-2652 for reservations.
Gas is expensive, so let the bank come to you. Through our remote deposit capture, you can deposit your checks into your account from your phone. And with our Dynamite Bank Pacific Visa debit card, you can use your money anytime, anywhere. It's the perfect combo.
Now we're banking on the future. Services to choose. Bank Pacific, where others put branches, we place roots.
Equal housing lender. Member FDIC. Crank it up.
So Franklin Mano Franklin picked up on my soft drink nomenclature rap, Jose, and he says, "Having a classic Coke, Malagomo?" 7-Up. Yeah. So before you go to get the Coke, make sure you close the light. Here we go. On the next article that I have here, Scottish decisions has implications far beyond the right to carry. While the main focus of today's decision in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association was on New York's May issue carry laws, and that is the main issue, and you can boil it down. No, even though it's a super long decision, you can boil it down to this. The New York statute invests unbridled discretion in a public official to determine who can and cannot exercise a constitutional right. Now, maybe a little discretion as be a principle would work, but not unbridled, unprincipled discretion. Thomas cast doubt on a number of other anti-Second Amendment laws on the books from California to New Jersey, including bans on so-called assault weapons and large-capacity magazines. Thomas declared that not only is New York's law invalid, but the two-step test used by the Second Circuit to determine the constitutionality of the law is unacceptable and should not be used by any lower court. And this comes out of the decision. Despite the popularity of the two-step approach, it's one step too many. Step one of the predominant framework is broadly consistent with Heller, which demands a test rooted in the Second Amendment's text as informed by history. But Heller and McDonald do not support applying means-end scrutiny in the Second Amendment context. Instead, the government must affirmatively prove that its firearms regulation is part of the historical tradition that delimits the outer bounds of the right to keep and bear arms. Now, that means-ends test. If we're talking about rational state purpose, here's how it works. A statute will pass constitutional muster if a lawyer can hypothesize a rational state purpose underlying the statute, and the statute has a reasonable chance of carrying that out in an unrestricted means. On the other end of the ladder is strict scrutiny. Strict scrutiny says that there must be a compelling government interest and a couple of other qualifiers. Well, what Thomas is saying here is you don't go with that compelling interest, that strict scrutiny. You've got to find that your regulation is broadly, which demands a test rooted in the Second Amendment's text and is informed by history. Heller and McDonald do not supply means-end scrutiny in the Second Amendment context. Instead, the government must affirmatively prove that its firearms regulation is part of the historical tradition that limits the outer bounds of the right to keep and bear arms. If you can't prove it's part of tradition, it doesn't matter how salutary you think the result will be. It's not going to go. This is, I can't wait till Turley jumps in on this because I think this is something brand fire new. Not only did Heller decline to engage in means-end scrutiny generally, but it also specifically ruled out the intermediate scrutiny test that respondents in the United States now urge us to adopt. That's what Thomas said. In sum, the Court of Appeal's second step is inconsistent with Heller's historical approach and its rejection of means-end scrutiny. We reiterate that the standard for applying the Second Amendment is as follows. When the Second Amendment's plain text covers an individual's conduct, the Constitution presumptively protects that conduct. The government must then justify its regulation by demonstrating that it is consistent with the nation's historical tradition of firearms regulation. Now that seems to rule out red flags, doesn't it? Only then may a court conclude that the individual's conduct falls outside the Second Amendment's unqualified command. Is there an historical tradition banning commonly owned firearms in the United States? Nope. There was no 19th century to every town for gun safety calling for bans on revolvers when they were first introduced. Sorry, Kathy. Or repeating rifles when they became widely used and commonly owned a few decades later. Much less widespread adoption of laws banning those firearms. Even fully automatic machine guns weren't banned under the provisions of the National Firearms Act. Though owners were required to pay a $200 tax stamp and register their machine gun with the federal government. The same holds true for banning magazines based on their capacity. No state banned the Henry repeating rifle because they could load on Sunday and shoot all week. And bans on detachable magazines didn't really appear until the 1980s and are still only in place in a handful of states. These aren't long-standing prohibitions, and they're not widespread either. So the argument they don't comport with history, text, or tradition of the Second Amendment is a pretty easy one to make. So it happens the Supreme Court has been holding on to several other Second Amendment related cases in conference while the Bruin case was being decided, including 2 cases dealing with magazine bans in New Jersey and California, as well as a challenge to Maryland's ban on AR-15s and other semi-automatic rifles. The court could decide to accept one or more of these cases, or could choose to send them back to the appellate courts with instructions to follow the proper test laid out in Bruin. Either way, they're not going to be kept in limbo for much longer. The next day for the court to release orders is next Monday, and that's when we're likely to learn if the court is going to accept another potentially blockbuster Second Amendment case directly or give lower courts the opportunity to follow its instructions on the proper constitutional test for gun control. There's going to be a lot of stuff written up about this decision. Okay, getting close to the home stretch here. I got Tina on the line. Tina wants to talk about the Second Amendment. Tell me about the Second Amendment, Tina.
Hi. So I guess I'm kind of confused because I agree with the Second Amendment. I believe you should be able to the right to bear arms. But I believe also in the capacity of the weapon should be controlled. I kind of believe in that because I don't see what you need a .38 special for, or an M80 to protect yourself, unless it's to protect yourself from a criminal. But if the criminals don't have those guns either, and everyone's only allowed to have a shotgun, like to feed themselves if they need to, or to shoot a snake that's outside, poisonous snake or something, then I believe that a shotgun should be the only thing that you should have a right to bear. Because it takes a lot to, one, hide it from someone that sees a gun and can run away from you with a shotgun, or, you know, you have to load it. I mean, I just feel like I'm a little mixed. I believe in the right to do almost anything, but I also see how careless having these little revolvers and stuff that don't, I mean, it's only to shoot a man to kill him.
And
go
that's
hunting with that.
And that's exactly what Heller and McDonald say. That's exactly the reason, the way they read the Second Amendment, Tina.
And the way also is one of my favorite bands from the 70s, well, Leonard Skinner, and the way that they were against handguns, but yet they were country boys that believed in the right to bear arms for shotguns and things that you know, if you need to protect yourself at your home from a crazy person, you can do it with a shotgun.
Suppose
you'd have one, but you would also use it for hunting.
Suppose you went to Chicago this weekend and you're walking down the street there. There are usually over 30 people shot in Chicago every weekend. Would you want to be lugging a shotgun around there?
Well, that's the thing. Now I couldn't, because I'd have to equal what the criminals carry. But if we outlaw it from everyone, those types, then far and few between should be able to have them. So my odds kind of change. So what I'm trying to say is they're not allowed to carry them.
Tina, very interesting. I hope you can call back Monday and we'll carry on here, but I got to go now. End of the show. Thanks for calling.
Okay. Thank you.
So here we go. We'll see you on Monday. And let's go, Brandon.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Gun legislation passes. I'm Jack Kelly on Fox News. The Senate, for the first time in decades, passing a bipartisan gun control bill.
By a vote of 65 to 33, the Senate's approved the bill aimed at enhancing background checks, expanding mental health services, and it would send money to states to help them pay for red flag laws. Those laws will let officials take guns away from people deemed to be a risk.
Fox's Jill Nato, President Biden issuing a statement urging the House to immediately pass the bill and send it to his desk. Earlier, the president reacted to the U.S. Supreme Court ruling that New York State's laws on concealed carry permits are unconstitutionally restrictive.
I think it's a bad decision. I think it's not reasoned accurately, but I'm disappointed.
Justice Clarence Thomas writing for the majority that the Constitution protects an individual's right to carry a handgun for self-defense outside the home. 6 other states have similar laws restricting the rights to carry a gun. The justices also ruled the 2 Republican North Carolina lawmakers can join a lawsuit to defend the constitutionality of the state's voter ID laws, and also ruled that death row prisoners can challenge a state's execution method under federal civil rights laws. Federal agents raided the home of former Justice Department Jeffrey Clark on Wednesday, taking several electronic devices, including his cell phone. Clark telling Fox's Tucker Carlson tonight.
I just think we're living in a era that I don't recognize, and increasingly, Tucker, I don't recognize the country anymore with these kinds of Stasi-like things happening.
The Democrat-controlled January 6th committee suggesting Thursday that Clark helped to hatch a plot to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. The national average price for gasoline continues to drop slightly. AAA says it's down 1.4 cents from yesterday, now selling at just under $4.93. America's listening to Fox News.